Five Nights at Freddy's security breach was...
I have to glitch this. What?
Released late in 2021. And let's just be honest, it wasn't that great. Not terrible, but not great. It looked pretty good, and the sheer size of the Pizzaplex itself was incredible, but it lacked a lot in gameplay and horror, had an extremely confusing, vague story that only got worse as you understood it better, and was full of countless bugs. But that last part, the bugs, made Security Breach my favorite FNAF game so far.
Whoa! Bug!
Speedrunning and Five Nights at Freddy's fit together about as well as me and coming up with a clever FNAF joke to be the punchline of this sentence. The whole gameplay of FNAF is just surviving until you've survived long enough to win, so making that happen faster just isn't really possible. A few of the later FNAF titles, like Pizzaria Simulator, had enough different types of gameplay that you could attempt to speedrun them, but they still weren't really popular in speedrunning, especially considering the popularity of the games in general. That was until Security Breach, the first mainline entry to ditch having you sit around in an office and wait for bears to come and attack you, and instead walk around an office as a bear. You still had to wait around for 6 AM, but rather than time progressing as actual real-life time passed, it was dictated by story events happening. Just like a real game. However, thanks to a few key glitches that let you completely destroy the world and go anywhere you wanted, people were able to get to an ending in just 5 minutes within the first few days of the game coming out. Upon this discovery, most people just resigned to feeling bad about Steel Wool putting so much effort into a game that turned out so horrible. But to some like me, this got me more invested into Security Breach than I ever was before. Now, yes, objectively, having a game full of bugs isn't exactly a good thing. People could beat the game without Freddy, do the boss fights in reverse order, spawn multiple copies of every character, and just basically time travel to nearly any point in the game. And in almost all of these instances, players would just respond with, "It's sad that they didn't seem to playtest this game at all." Dumb. Which, might I say, being a playtester must suck because nobody cares about the QA section of the credits unless the game is buggy. And it's not even their fault. In all likelihood, they found these bugs, but the bugs were just ignored because deadlines were coming up. Anyway, the thing with all these issues is that, as someone with a minor interest in game design as a whole, seeing a game unraveled like this is endlessly interesting. For example, this room has an event trigger to start the cutscene where Vanessa catches you and you first meet Vanny. But the trigger for this cutscene isn't actually removed afterwards, so you're able to go back later and re-trigger the same cutscene, setting your game back in time to that point in progression. There's another trigger that also wasn't removed in Roxy Raceway, where you can get the damaged head. Players can go and do that at any time to set their progress to that point in the story, so people would get to Roxy Raceway from out of bounds to set their progress forward, or some people return there after staying past 6 AM to set their progress back in time to allow them to save the game again, before it was updated and let you do that anyway. The biggest glitch in Security Breach was just a way to deload the entire game by simply entering Freddy while in the air. I have no idea why that happens, but I want to know because it's so weird that it does. Which is ultimately where my enjoyment of Security Breach comes from, a fascination with its flaws. Learning about oversights like this is really exciting, and I honestly can't tell you why.
What?
But I'm not alone. I might be the minority when it comes to Security Breach, but there's other games with this exact situation where tons of players enjoy the game because of its flaws, rather than in spite of them. The first Pokemon games are not well made by today's standards. You can finish them with 0 seconds on the in-game clock if you just use enough menu manipulation to just warp the player to the end of the game. Several mechanics are broken, tons of moves don't work as intended, the balance of types is almost non-existent, etc, etc. But one of the most famous things in gaming is Missing No. Missing No is a glitch caused by encountering a wild Pokemon where no data for wild encounters exist. It reads data from elsewhere in the game to try to produce something for you to fight, and simply encountering it rewrites parts of the code that glitch out several other sections of the game, but people still love it. And there's many other glitches that are just as fascinating. If you trick the game by leaving the Safari Zone while it still thinks you're in there, and then time it so that your Safari Zone timer runs out at the same point that you're jumping off a ledge, it'll immediately teleport you back to the Safari Zone entrance. But the game doesn't remove the fact that you were jumping off a ledge. That event never ends. And since the ledges are basically just walls that you can go through one way but not the other, that basically means that you can move through any walls after doing this glitch. Dissecting why a glitch happens at a basic level like this is some of the most fun I get out of games with lots of bugs. It gives me this weird insight on how the games are created. However, just because a game has tons of glitches to explore doesn't mean the game has to be mediocre without them. Mario 64. A game with so many glitches that you can beat the whole game without collecting a single star. Well, actually that's almost entirely because of just one oversight, the backwards long jump, where you can gain an almost infinite amount of speed by just long jumping backwards because there isn't a cap on backwards movement speed, which is actually a fairly common issue in a lot of games. But still, the things you can do with that alone are crazy. Mario 64 is the most popular game to speedrun, and I won't pretend that that isn't mostly due to it just being a good and fun game to just schmoove in. But the most popular way to run Mario 64 isn't 70 stars, where you get the minimum amount of stars required to unlock the final Bowser stage. It's 16 stars, where you get enough stars to unlock the rabbit Mips in the basement, clip into the second Bowser stage to unlock the upstairs, and then BLJ to the final Bowser stage to finish the game. On top of this, there are countless other ways that people try to break down Mario 64. But how broken is Mario 64 really?
To answer that, we need to talk about parallel universes.
Parallel universes, which sound insane, but are basically just a duplicate of the stage's basic geometry without any of the added objects that would be in. A similar thing can happen in other games like Sonic the Hedgehog, where if you went too high or low enough, the stage would wrap around and you'd be in a copy of the same stage just without enemies or rings or boxes or anything like that. To me, it's not only interesting to see that this happens, but also incredibly interesting that it happens in multiple completely unrelated games for seemingly different reasons. On top of all of this, glitches like this can give you insight into the structure of a game, like what is considered an object and what is considered geometry. In most games, almost any moving thing would be an object, while unmovable things are just geometry. But there are some situations where it isn't as clear-cut as that. Some of the platforms you walk on in the stage Lethal Lava Land are actually objects, but only visually. The collision of the platforms is considered stage geometry, so if you remove all the objects from Lethal Lava Land, you'd still be able to move around. You just wouldn't be able to see what you're standing on. You need a lot of speed to actually get to parallel universes at all, however. And like most things in Mario 64, this is usually done with some good old BLJs. Actually, thinking about it, Mario 64 has its one main glitch, the BLJ, but Security Breach also had really just one main glitch, being able to deload the game by jumping into Freddy. And you could argue that Pokemon's main one was menu manipulation? So I guess you just need to give players one big glitch to mess around with, and we'll be able to have fun with the game forever, though it isn't actually that simple. Games like Ocarina of Time and the earlier example of Pokemon do arguably have one big glitch, but they gain their glitchy appeal from far more than just the one. As well as that, all of these glitches themselves usually have to strike a delicate balance of being really easy to do if you know what it is, but not as easy to do accidentally. The problem with Security Breach is deloading glitch, and part of the reason why it's considered a buggy mess by casual players when Mario 64 wasn't, was that it was far too easy to simply just enter Freddy while in the air. In fact, it's almost instinctual at times to jump when entering Freddy. On the flip side, it's not as easy to accidentally spam long jumps backwards on a staircase rapidly as you build up enough speed to go through things. With Pokemon, menu manipulation wasn't super easy to do accidentally. There isn't much of a reason for you to intentionally try to move an item from your bag to your list of Pokemon or vice versa. But overall, Pokemon Red and Blue just had way too many bugs to avoid. And I think that's what ultimately determines if a game is a buggy mess or a great game with some glitches to play with. How easy it is to experience these glitches accidentally. You might think it has to do with whether the game is good without the glitches or not, but a bad game with extremely hard to do glitches will still just be considered bad as a game, not because of any glitches. And if anything, a bad game without glitches may be considered a good game with them, which is, to me, sort of how Security Breach turned out. I wouldn't consider Security Breach a bad game by default, but it isn't necessarily stellar. That is, until you unlock the power of the glitches it has. There was a patch dropped for Security Breach that aimed to make the game more polished overall. The thing is, the patch didn't actually completely fix the glitches that were present, and the general reaction to this knowledge was further disappointment that the game remained buggy. However, it clearly wasn't aimed to actually completely fix most of the major issues, and instead aimed to just make them harder to do accidentally. Now simply jumping into Freddy doesn't deload the game, and instead you have to both exit a hiding spot and try to enter Freddy at the same time to deload the game, which not only makes it harder to do accidentally, but also adds an interesting spice of it being limited to certain areas rather than it being a magic skeleton key to go anywhere at any time. So I don't think this patch was a massive failure like others seem to think, because it kept the glitches around for people who wanted to do them, while making them harder for casual players to stumble upon. And while all this might make it seem like the patch was just an overall positive, there is a big issue that Steelwool missed. Simply making a glitch harder to do, no matter how minor the change might have been, will mean that speedrunners just won't use that version of the game. They don't need to update, and they won't, because now their glitches they use are harder. So trying to half-fix the glitches doesn't actually end up working out. But at least the effort wasn't completely wasted, because now with the new free DLC coming out next year, if people try to speedrun that, they'll have to use the most recent patch of the game, I'm sure, and then they'll appreciate the glitches still being around. However, generally, it's just a poor idea to intentionally pursue this glitch balance in a game. Usually the balance is impossible to achieve intentionally, and only happens accidentally when your goal is to just remove all of the bugs and you end up missing a couple. Discovering a bug during testing and leaving it in is always a recipe for a glitch being far too easy to happen accidentally. However, this doesn't mean that any interaction from developers will ruin this balance. Team Cherry, the creators of Hollow Knight, have at times left in unintentional skips used in speedrunning, as long as it doesn't allow you to soft lock the game. And when creating Ocarina of Time 3D, the developers Grezzo did the same thing, leaving in glitches from the original game that weren't too harmful, since in both of these cases, these glitches and skips were a big part of the appeal of the game to many, and they were hard enough to do that it wouldn't interfere with a casual experience. The way that glitches interact with the games we play can be some of our favorite parts of otherwise already amazing games, and at times can be the only good parts of otherwise terrible games. These glitches can range from simply funny visual changes to the basis of an entire esport. It's something that can never be forced. And in an era of post-launch updates where glitches that weren't caught before release will just be patched out afterwards, the art of these unintentional gems has been dying out. But there are developers who understand the appeal and help to preserve it, rather than eliminate it. And when that happens, it can save a game. Thank you to you guys, actually. In the last video, I did a funny little bit about having no subscribers, And I was kind of planning on writing out that joke for at least a few more videos. Like maybe in this video I'd be like, thank you to my one subscriber, Dave. You're really keeping it up. But you guys had to go and ruin that joke immediately. But thank you, seriously, for all of your support.